Good morning, Bitcoiners. Morning, Kevin. Morning, Kevin. So, the sun definitely up, right? We all saw it. We all saw it. I checked. The great news is Bitcoin's running. All that's left to do is have a coffee, talk about what's new. So, I'm going to need your help again with the audio and the video. Let me know if anything's going wrong. I think I fixed things, but you never know, right? It's not easy. This whole audio video thing can be really annoying. So please let me know if the audio breaks up at all this morning. I believe I fixed it. As I said, I believe I fixed it, right? I believe I fixed it. So there we go. And I'm still running off of the iPhone camera. So I'll warn you right now that if I do get into trouble, that's what I'm going to kill. I couldn't mimic everything that happened yesterday. So I ran a couple tests and so far it was good. So we'll see. We'll see. I've got the activity monitor up to make sure that we're not destroying the CPU, as friends in the comments of the video help me solve the problem. I think we're there. I think we're there. So today, I woke up as I normally do. I checked the news and see what's going on, and everywhere I looked, it was good news. It was just good news. So I'm going to share all the good news with you this morning. Because there's a lot. There's a lot of things happened over the last couple of days, and there's a really interesting pattern. So the first one, of course, everyone talking about politics and what's going on with the speaker thing in DC, and the fellow who was running for speaker had to go a bunch of times. There was a long vote. We don't care about that stuff, right? We care in the end about some of the concessions that were made. So when this guy, Kevin McCarthy, won, he had to agree to do one thing, which was a series of hearings now. So that's what we're going to get. So he basically wasn't able to dictate the agenda entirely of the upcoming session. He gave away power. He won the seat, the gavel in the end for speaker, but he gave up a bunch of power. And the power he gave up is related to the agenda and what's going on and what their priorities are and what they're going to focus on. So it turns out that they're going to do a Frank Church style inquiry. What's a Frank Church style inquiry? Well, you've seen lots of references to it lately. It was the investigation in the 1970s about the CIA infiltration of mainstream media. Those quotes you hear often about NBC being an arm of government propaganda come from the Church Committee. That's where it was on record. We've seen people dig up video archive footage of that hearing recently. There's even the point where the CIA director goes off camera and says, I don't want to talk about who's in these different agencies, different news outlets. I don't want to talk about who's in the New York Times. I don't want to talk about who's in NBC and all that stuff. So that's a video that Glenn Greenwald has shared in the past few months. People digging up what archival footage there actually remains of that, because that investigation was memory hold already then. And we don't get much about it. But now that it's going to happen again, right? So it looks like we're going to have a paralyzed Congress. They're not going to be able to get much done anyway. It looks like legislation is going to get jammed up. It looks like all those things are going to happen, right? We're not going to get into one of these scenarios again where a $1.7 trillion bill is passed in the dead of night and all that kind of stuff. Just 1 second here. Sorry, team. My wife has decided to wash a child's hair, and it's nothing but crying in the background. So I had to ask her to stop. We can do it later. We have all day. It's the golden age. It's here. We're talking about the golden age, so we can take care of it. So there's going to be a Frank Church style inquiry, and the whole premise of it is that there's going to be an investigation into infiltration along the lines of Twitter files that we've seen so far. So everything will be related to how much influence the national intelligence community has in things like NBC or the New York Times or Twitter or Facebook or any of these other things. So we're now actually going to get, an investigation into this stuff. So way better than we did before. And you're going to start understanding things in the news more once you hear about it. So you even got this one, right? You've got the New York Times running a story today about late night comedy. Did you hear about this one? So late night comedy. So they've decided to do the 2022 and late night comedy, Stephen Colbert and all these other guys. But they left out the Fox News show Greg Gutfeld because his ratings are the highest by far. I think some nights he gets more than the collective ratings of all of them. So they just didn't even talk about it, right? And this is one of those instances that shows their ideological colors again, as if we needed any more evidence. But when you see things like that, and you see that basically there's no even humor on that side of the conversation, right? They don't even, these shows aren't funny and no one's watching them. No one is watching Stephen Colbert. No one is watching Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon or whoever these people are. No one's watching this stuff anymore. The ratings are in the tank. And because mostly it's, song and dance stuff about taking a vaccine, and the idea that it is influenced by higher powers and by script writers and people trying to focus on narrative control, is pretty clear now, and will only get clearer to folks. And then the other good news is, with the speaker deciding that the agenda is going to be about inquiries like this, just focusing on talking and having committee work is pretty much all they're capable of anyway. So we can't expect them to do too much stuff, which is what we want, right? We don't want an efficient Congress and one that's running on all cylinders and has all kinds of capacity to pass laws and do this and do that and respond to different problems. We don't really want that, right? That's not really how the American system was set up ever. The American system, I've said for a long time, one of the brilliant things about it is that it is bottom up. And if you look at the history of the United States, there is no country ever that has changed as much as the United States has throughout its short history. And to the extent of the change, almost in these 80-year blocks that we've talked about, things change so quickly. And one of the amazing things about America is that it's never been top-down as far as the change goes, right? It's had, as we were witnessing, top-down governance structures, but the real change in America doesn't come because of bright ideas from politicians and leadership and charisma and all these other things. It comes when the majority of people decide on changing entire worldviews, and we've seen it happen time and time again. And we might be in another instance where that happens. Our expectations of government are about to change, and that's a really, really big difference. Now, you can tell there's a lot of people just unprepared for what's going on, right? You see everyone on the left last night kind of reacting. You've got this guy, Luke Zaleski, who I bring him up for the laughs. He's a Condé Nast lawyer, and I follow him on Twitter just to understand what people who are experiencing cognitive dissonance sound like and what the reference is. He's kind of like my barometer for how folks who are suffering from daily cognitive dissonance react to the news. So here's what he said about what happened this weekend. He said, "You had your country stolen from you in the middle of the night, America, 2 years to the day after they attacked your Capitol and Congress to try to take it from you the first time. Wake up." So it's the old January 6th thing again, right? It's the January 6th, it was a coup. And then there's other folks here that say, this guy's Paul Rykoff. So he's an independent journalist, but he gets published in all of the big papers all the time. Here's what he says about this weekend. "Too many seem to think this is all fun. Our country's government is paralyzed, and every backbencher and hack in Congress is playing for the cameras and loving the attention. How do they think this crap looks to our troops serving in harm's way now around the world?" So this is what cognitive dissonance looks like, right? This is it. When you have to twist reality. Now, do you think that there are soldiers back home, soldiers wherever they are in the world right now? First of all, to even prioritize the feelings of soldiers abroad and the missions they have to undertake, as if like they're not inspired enough to do them, already you're completely in the wrong list of priorities. You're asking completely the wrong questions, right? So Right away, that's a sign of cognitive dissonance. You can tell cognitive dissonance when it makes no sense, right? So it makes no sense. Why would anyone be worried about the soldiers and their level of inspiration based on the behavior of Congress abroad? Like, you don't organize anything around that, right? Nothing. There's nothing that would be relevant to. And you know, now that the only thing they're gonna do is look into the persuasion and manipulation machine. Oh, audio getting scratchy now since coming off mute. It's the golden age of honey. Oh, thanks, guys. Audio, okay. Just restart the mic, you're saying? Yeah, I'll try that. Going to be, how did that work, guys? You know, I'm not getting any CPU load indication here, though, so that might be a change in dilemma. Let me know how I'm coming through now. All right. Sounds good. Okay. Good. Excellent. Thank you. We're going to get to the bottom of this stuff, guys. This was a experimental week for this studio. I'm not sure I can run this camera, though. That might be what's doing it. We'll see. So, let's go back to the abilities and capacity of Congress, right? So it looks like we're going to get what works best for American change, which is a gridlocked, seized Congress that can't get stuff done. And you're starting to see, you know, it might seem like a little change, the speaker piece, but think about it like this, right? So they're going to be looking at only stuff about influence and persuasion and psyops and stuff like that now. But look at the other questions that it's helped to provoke, right? You get Glenn Greenwald here coming up with a great point, right? Can someone tell me why it's so horrifying and devastating for Congress to take a few days to debate and negotiate over who should be third in line to the presidency and rule the House? Aren't debates of this kind called democracy, as rare as it is now for Congress to do this? And then he mentions the $1.7 trillion bill that just passed was 4,000 pages, and nobody who voted for it read it. But that's how it works, because the vote was whipped. I worked in a whip's office once, and in Canada. And one of the things that I understood at the time was that you could basically whip these guys without even whipping them. They would always do what you needed them to do. And there was a time when I wanted to separate caucus. We have senators and congressmen in Canada, but they're slightly different. And there was a reason to sort of cleave off the senators and not allow them to caucus with the congressmen anymore. Political at the time, and I thought it was a really clever idea. I pushed it with the prime minister. In the end, Trudeau, when he was still a candidate, copied the idea and did what I thought was right, break these caucuses apart and almost kind of go allow people to decide for themselves more, which would often give you the gridlock you wanted anyway, right? So I pushed for this to be done back in 2013. Trudeau did it, and it's one of the reasons why he got elected. It was a bold move at the time. And he caught, you know, his office was across the hall from mine. He probably heard me. Yeah, I'm not saying for sure, but his office literally was across the hall from mine. And I used to yell it on the phone to people saying it was the only, we had to do it in Canada. Anyway, you don't need to know the details. They're boring and stupid politics stuff, but there was a reason why we fought for it. There was a reason why I thought it was a good idea, and it catapulted Trudeau at the time. So, you know, there's a lot to do with this whipping and the ill effects that it's created, right? The ill effects that it's created. It actually goes back to the whole Cold War, World War II footing. That discipline that the congressmen learned at the time came from this urgency around Cold War politics and around World War II politics, where basically you had to just come up with the mindset that whatever was being decided top down was the right thing to do, right? Of course, military should always be top down. There's no reason why military should stop being a top down organization. It's like football, right? You know, that's why the coaches in the National Football League in U.S. football are the celebrities. They're the stars. You know, more people can name coaches of NFL teams than players. Players are just weapons. And you can name the battlefield generals, the quarterbacks, and some of the really good armaments like a wide receiver or a linebacker or a tight end. But most of the players in the National Football League are anonymous because they're cogs in a wheel of the design of the top-down structure of a coach. And the coach is seen as the general, and that's why the coaches are so heavily followed and so heavily quoted and sourced and referenced. And it's unique to that sport, right? The National Football League is unique in that way, where the coaches are some of the most important people, because it is a sort of militaristic game, right? It's not the same as baseball and not the same as hockey. Hockey is all read and react, and can't really, you don't even need a coach, in my opinion, in hockey. And a lot of people have argued that the coaches all use the same system, the players know the system. The coach is there to be like a motivator or something like that, right? They can't really have much in-game influence. A bit like a soccer coach, I'd say it's along the same boat, or the lowest and the weakest of the coaches being the NBA coaches, because the 5 players can coach themselves. It's basketball, right? And generally their skills are what allows a team to win, right? The skills of the players themselves. With only a 5-person squad, it's pretty clear that their skills can add up to a lot more than can add up to more than another 5-man team, and therefore they can win. Football is not exactly, it's a 100-man roster. There's 50 people on the field at a time, right? It's and Denise, what does whipping the vote mean? Whipping the vote is really simple. So it's called a whip, right? In any leadership part of a Congress or a Senate, in the British system anyway, you have a whip. The whip will coordinate with the speaker. So the whip is sort of the second in command to the speaker. And the whip is just there to make sure everyone goes to committees, right? So the whip says you have a committee at this time and you have to be there because there's going to be a vote. The whip has to know about all the votes and all the committees on the floor, everywhere, everything that's going on. They have to follow attendance. And then what happens is, if there is some piece of legislation that someone's conscience might might be provoked by, the whip is there to make sure that doesn't happen, right? So there are free votes. So they'll often say, oh, it's a free vote, and they won't bother because there are no opposing entities or special interests or whatever. So they say, oh, this is a free vote. And then it'll just happen. But most votes are whipped, and they're whipped for millions of reasons. And what happens is the speaker will coordinate with the executive branch often. That was supposed to be a no-no, but it happens all the time in all parliaments that I've seen. So the leadership and the whip is a part of leadership, basically. A whip is a part of the leadership in the chamber. And the whip is the person who takes notes, the person who keeps score, basically. And if a congressman wants to take vacation, for example, or they have a speech across the country and they can't make it, they have to tell the whip. They have to say, whip, can I go give a speech in San Francisco, even though there's a vote? The whip will look at the roster and say, well, yeah, we're going to win. We're going to win. Cracking coming back. Gosh, damn it. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this mic right out, and we'll have to go back to let me just change it. We're going to have to go back to the other one. All right. How about this? We're going to go on this now and hope it does better. It's the machine's microphone. Yeah, maybe I'll put it back on. CPU stuff that we talked about yesterday is just not spiking, so it can't be that. It says my system's only using I've got 60-something idle % on CPU. My memory is fine, no pressure, energy, nothing. I got the activity monitor up. Seems clean. Anyway, we're going to figure it out. So you get, politics basically is just going to be now. We're not even measuring efficiency anymore. None of that's going to happen. It's going to be total gridlock. There is no efficiency coming. There's no results possible other than fighting about how much manipulation and psyops have been going on between media outlets and national intelligence institutions. That's the best case scenario for politics for us. I mean, we can't do better than that right now in this climate. That's the best case scenario. And the effects of that, the trickle-down effects of that, become pretty interesting. So, you get this story that I am covering this morning on something the Biden administration did from an executive level that's pretty interesting, and it relates to corporate responsibility. In this case, 3M and Teflon is one that Doomberg brought up today. So Doomberg, in his Substack, was talking about this idea of pollution value maximization, and the National Bureau of Economic Research. Do I think the Twitter files had something to do with this, P-Man Van asks? Here's what I think. I don't know if it had something to do with it, but because we're going to start learning more about persuasion, in particular military operation persuasion, we're naturally going to find some of the overlap between corporate irresponsibility and the war machine. So everything I just mentioned about the structure of Congress and the hierarchy and the order, and remember I mentioned the Cold War aspect, and it was all about being on that footing of the Cold War. I'll even go back to, put Obama into that context. There was a reason why presidents had to be so measured in their speech. The tension around Cold War was, as it was, dangerous and heightened, and everyone was worried, and that's why Congress abdicated a lot of authority to leadership at the time, right? Because everything was sensitive and they didn't know, and that's why you ended up with presidents like Obama, who was so well spoken and whose speech was so measured and focus group tested, and all those kinds of things were a result of that environment. That's what made Trump so revolutionary. That's what made him so different, is that he was giving 10,000 unsolicited, unscripted, untested. His focus group was, if you weren't aware of this, his focus group was a single thing. He would look to make sure that the red light was on when he was candidate Trump, right? When he was candidate Trump, because he was just a candidate, and they didn't normally, the mainstream news, cover just candidates to that extent. Every little speech they gave, they wouldn't cover them. But because he was creating such a firestorm, his whole goal was to see as many of those red lights on and engaged as possible. And that's all he was aiming for. That's it. It was make sure they don't shut the red lights off in mid-speech and go away. And if everyone's red light is on, they're all live, that means he's being broadcast everywhere. And his whole goal was to keep the routine going long enough to keep the red lights on. That was it. And the world had never seen anything like that. That was completely new based on all the stuff I mentioned before. But finally now, it looks like what has happened with this case with McCarthy, and now they're going to look into influence. They're going to uncover so much stuff. And now I don't think this 3M case is directly related, because it turns out Trump stopped this. So what I'm about to describe is basically corporate responsibility for producing products that they know are harmful, but when they do their actuarial science, they say, well, the cost of remediating this is so great, and we're going to make money selling it anyway. So if we just pay for the whatever one, occasional death they cause, or occasional whatever they cause, that's better. It's cheaper. And this was a realization made along the lines of. So 3M, heavy military influence, right? They, in their history, they were a major war supplier, tape and all these kinds of things, right? So they were, like any factory, like any manufacturer in America, mobilized in the 1940s into the war machine. And everyone who went into the war machine came out differently. And just like people who go into the war machine come out differently, companies too, right? So it looks like 3M was created by innocent Minnesotans who had a couple of ideas for practical farm living and stuff like that. These were miners and explorers, but of course they got pulled up into the war machine, and what ended up happening, right? They created cool stuff, but they were a major part of the war effort. And they went from just being a small company that made tape and stuff in the 30s to being drafted into war. And by 1946, so very quickly they entered the war with the United States effort in 1940, when the industrial machine was repackaged and reoriented. In 1946, they were already big enough to be on the New York Stock Exchange. So it didn't take very long. And from then on, they were a publicly traded company with all of these protections. So what Doomberg is talking about here is something that we've got to give Biden credit for, and something we've got to criticize Trump for, right? Trump took away the liability of companies who perform these types of actuarial magic tricks, that knowingly understand a product is bad, decide it's cheaper to just keep selling it and deal with the problems. So Teflon and 3M, one of those cases. So I'm not saying they're related, right? I'm not saying they're related. I'm saying these are the types of results that are going to start happening now because the weight of the system is just too great and people are complaining, and we have all of these pressure valves being released. And again, I think all of these pressure valves are things that began in World War II. You know, the frame that I use for Bitcoin and for what's going on in the world today is basically we never shut down the World War II war machine. We just kept it running, the aircraft carriers, everything. Right? We just kept it all running. And it ran and ran and ran. And we've never recalibrated, really. So the companies that went in got to exist afterwards with what we talked about once in the show called the Coase theorem. Remember the theory of the firm? So the quick refresher on the theory of the firm created by Ronald Coase, a lawyer who won the Nobel Prize in 1991, lived to 100 and something. He died in 2012 or something like that. And he would have been a Bitcoiner for sure, for sure. We missed out on another one, right? Michael Crichton, him, there's a few of them out there that we really missed out on as Bitcoiners. Michael Crichton, I think to this day would have been the greatest Bitcoiner ever. And I'm so sad he never got to see it. He died just right before. Michael Crichton being the author of Jurassic Park and a bunch of other stuff. Right? He was a medical doctor who quit medicine, never really even practiced because his book sold. And he made a lot of money off creating the show ER in America, which was the highest rated TV show for years and years and years. He owned it. It was based on his experiences. He wrote and directed, I think, the first episode, and that was it. And he made like Seinfeld style Hollywood money after that. I think he became a multi-billionaire off one syndicated TV show. So forget about the movies that he made, which were all very successful too. Jurassic Park, I guess, being the most successful. But, you know, really talented guy, and like kind of 7 feet tall or something ridiculous too, or 6'10" or something wild. But boy, oh boy, would he have been a great Bitcoiner. You know, World War II, the machine, when you look at this, Coase theorem was basically explains what happens to the legal system, what happens to companies, how they grew so big, why they grew to the size they grew to. Basically, it is from manipulating the legal system and putting their finger on the balance. So pure law should work like a noise complaint. 2 people come in, the judge says, you be quiet until this time, you don't mind noise until this time, and you go home and you'll come right down the middle. What Ronald Coase argued is that companies formed in the first place in order to imbalance that. So you hire lawyers internally. And once you have a team of lawyers that are just paid a salary, right, you can mobilize them onto any legal case you need. You can put them onto the person doing the noise complaint, and you can bury them in legal expertise and costs and all those other things. And 3M was one of those companies that came out of World War II with this privilege. And the privilege came from being part of the war machine. So they didn't even have to acknowledge liability. And that's what was so amazing about Doomberg's piece today, and about why this change in prosecutorial powers are so important, that change in corporate responsibility is so important, because everything we know about the 3M case is that they completely knew it caused cancer. There was no doubt about it, and they proceeded anyway. There was no like, oh, we didn't know and they hid it. They openly talked about it within their meetings and minutes and things like that. And the interesting thing is that they never once thought that they personally would have to pay pay for the damages of the company. Right? There is a shield inside of these companies, and that comes from this war measures time that shielded personal responsibility from the corporate responsibility side. So these folks knew as individuals that they would never be subject to any responsibility for this. And that's the remarkable part. And that's what can change now. So definitely not arguing that they're related, arguing, just mentioning that they're happening at the same time, right? Mentioning that they're happening at the same time. This mic reset shit sucks. Okay, should be better now. So the 3M case, you know, interesting, definitely. It's part of this dismantling of the war machine. So politically, orders changing, legal responsibility, order changing. But even like think about that war machine again for a second, right? The companies that went through had privileges, and the systems they built, the armaments they built, helped crystallize this whole system around the world. But even Elon Musk today mentioning, right? Elon Musk coming out today talking about tanks. We've talked about that on this show for a long time. And what did Elon Musk say about tanks? He said, and he's responding to Richard Garriott, who is an astronaut, right? So Richard Garriott, the astronaut, says, tanks, mighty as they seem on the face, seem a bit old school. Seems like light mobile GPS drone sat targeting items are dominating these days. Am I missing something? Are tanks still superior when backed up like carriers are backed up in a fleet? And Elon Musk responds, tanks are a death trap now. With neither side having air superiority, you're left with infantry and artillery, essentially World War I. Hey, we've been saying that for a long time, that the cost of war, the cost of violence is becoming, for lack of a better word, democratized, right? You don't want to say that those words shouldn't really go together, right? But here we are. And the idea that you could have a war machine worth billions of dollars that is now vulnerable to armaments that cost hundreds of dollars and getting cheaper is a major, major change. It's a major change. We're seeing right now, war has broken out in Mexico, by the way. I don't know if you guys saw that yesterday, but war has broken out in Mexico. And it's the Mexican Defense Forces against the Sinaloa cartel. And I guess they arrested El Chapo's son. And so war. What do you see in the war? I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's drones. I've seen the footage at night. It's just drones shooting tracer bullets down into the ground and people shooting back. But I think you're going to see fleets of drones tracing cartel people around for a long time. Trump said it yesterday that he's going to use the military against the cartels. And what military is he using? Are we going to send American troops down to Mexico? I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be troops. I don't think it's going to be anything like that. I think it's going to be people in a bunker and drones sent in fleets without any flag, without any designation. They won't even know who they're coming from. It's all going to be deniability, all those kinds of things, but that's coming. Now, I don't want to see drones going up and down the Pacific coast killing people. That's not what I want to see. But it's coming. And in the end, it's going to change a lot about how we even think about war. And we're going to see that these things are not as cheap as they once were, right? So are not as expensive as they once were. So major, major change. So we got law changing before our eyes for the better. Corporate responsibility, a big part of the World War II machine coming apart, right? Political structures, top-down political order in America, cracked, totally cracked, right? We have an inefficient government who's, I think, all they're going to achieve is looking into PSYOP collusion with media entities. That's it. That's all we're going to get out of the next 2 years, which is enough. That's all we need. Right? I don't want them doing more than that. So responsibility changing, political systems changing, war changing, right? Becoming not so just like companies, right? The whole imbalance in the system that theory of the firm instituted in our companies, the manipulation of the legal system that was a result of having these huge corporations with huge legal teams, being able to fight against the little guy, and that going away. But also the same analogy, the huge war machines that made the little guy just as powerless. That whole frame is gone, right? That whole frame is gone. What about education? What about education, right? So these are just systems that we use, but one of the most important systems that is the foundation of America and this modern world that they've created is education. And on this show, we are definitely negative on the US public education system, and have been for quite some time. I was a teacher before I did all of this stuff, before I was involved, and before I went to law school. While I went to law school, I was a teacher. Before I went to law school, I was a teacher. I've seen inside public school systems. I've taught privately. I teach my kids. Pedagogy is a really dear subject to my heart. I was a camp counselor. That's where I got my start as a teacher, where I understood some of the relations. So I've been doing it since I was in my mid-teens, really mid-teens. I was as old as most high school students when I was already working with kids. And from there, it just didn't stop for years. I did that for 10 years straight through. So, have an interest in it, have seen systems, have seen how bad they are. And I've seen the best of the public school systems, because Quebec has a good public school system, but I've even seen, how inefficient and inadequate that one is. And that's much better than a lot of the public systems in the United States on a whole. But here's the good news. COVID has caused public school enrollment to fall by 1.4 million students, according to the Wall Street Journal today. So that means that there were over 50 million. So this is 2 to 3% in 1 year. 3%, that comes out to 3% basically. If they're 50 million, 1.5, it's about 3%, 2.8% drop in enrollment. And that's in just 2 years. So you get, a pretty big drop off. And we haven't even begun to explore the legal changes that happened as a result of COVID. So a bunch of states getting deregistered from the National Teachers Union, and that was a big change. You see the political debates in all kinds of states really around charter schools, education choice, what's going on with all that stuff. And, that's a big, big change. And then you get DeSantis yesterday in Florida, right? So we celebrated one of DeSantis's acts last year, which was that he made financial literacy a key component and mandatory component to high school graduation in Florida. It's great news, right? Really great news. That's the kind of curriculum or the kind of course that needs to be on every curriculum in America. And to this day, I still think Bitcoin is the number one medium for that, because it provokes everyone to go, down the rabbit hole. And I've argued for a long time the rabbit hole is really a series of podcasts and videos and books and a reading list and all those kinds of things. And that trajectory leads you to understand and be literate in finance. And that's one of the great gifts Bitcoin has given the world, is this platform that has inspired folks to, scratchy audio again? Yeah, and it just did a every 10 minutes, huh? Mix reset time. Mix reset time, P-Man Van. I think what we're going to do tomorrow, let me see if this makes a difference today. All right, I'm going to do one little trick here. I got to see if this makes a difference, because I wasn't able to induce this on my own. So I'm switching cameras, which I just did. I switched cameras, and tell me if the audio is better. And I'm going to find out if it wasn't this iPhone bridge to my computer here that caused it. I don't know. I'm just try something new. So bear with me. This is not my good camera. Good so far, yeah. This is not the good camera, but it doesn't really matter because we're throttled by Restream in any event. So that's no big deal. We talked about DeSantis last year in that package to graduate, or in that program to graduate from high school. You have to be financially literate. Here's what he's done to a liberal arts college in Florida. And this is one that's under state control, right? So this is within his mandate. He's not influencing an institution that would be out of bounds, for example, right? There's still freedom. You can start up a school that denies all of this stuff if you would choose, but this is one that he funds, or his administration funds. So here's the agenda for transforming the new college. This is in Sarasota, Florida. Shift the university to a classical liberal arts model. Restructure the administration and mission statement. Create a new core curriculum and academic master plan. Abolish diversity, equity, and inclusion, and replace it with equity, merit, and colorblindedness. Restructure the academic departments to reflect the new pedagogical approach. hire new faculty with expertise in constitutionalism, free enterprise, civic virtue, family life, religious freedom, and American principles. Establish a graduate school for training teachers in classical education. So it's a pretty good start. I mean, pretty interesting stuff, right? And it's, the thing that I think is most interesting is this college was already known for doing something unique, which was that at a contract with the students. They don't give out grades. They make a contract that says, between you and the school, here are the things you agree on. You'll do this many classes, you'll pass this many. If you pass this many, you get credit for everything you did this semester. There's all, it's personalized deals. And I always thought that's what made me even know about the school first. It's a very small school. There's only like 1,000 students or something. But now they get this really brand new type of structure and direction and orientation. And it's interesting that I'm not saying they're right even, right? I'm not saying everything in their curriculum here is right, but that we are in a world of changing what has gone before, especially in higher education. Really important. So changing in lower education, right? The charter schools, public school enrollment way down, and now changing in universities. So, and this is all relevant because it looks like, Gavin Newsom, who no one should ever underestimate, right? There's the talent of politicians because of everything that happened from World War II. The individual talent of a candidate can really matter for president. It really can. And Gavin Newsom, who's currently the governor of California, you got to admit, this is someone who I've thought was dead meat a bunch of times, and I was wrong every time. And so now I've come to actually respect his skills and talent and all that much more than I ever have. And here's what he's done. A lot of people tout him as the presidential candidate if Biden can't make it. And what does he do yesterday? Well, he's not stupid, so he goes and attacks Ron DeSantis about this education stuff and everything else at once, right? So it looks like they're, sort of dancing in a 2024 potential opening bout. But here's what he said. He says, long dormant authoritarian impulses have been awakened. These politicians prey on fear. They silence speech, fire teachers, kidnap migrants, subjugate women, attack the Special Olympics, and even demonize Mickey Mouse. They cry freedom while dictating the choices people can make. It's a very powerful argument, right? A very persuasive argument as well. So, DeSantis has shown a willingness to experiment, and it's going to open him up to criticism. But nevertheless, fighting is good. Right? We like when these guys fight. The more they fight, the more stuff like this new church committee thing is going to get done, right? So we've got education changing, we've got law and responsibility changing, particularly in the corporate level. We've got war totally changing. Politics in America changed before our eyes this weekend. January 6th, as we mentioned yesterday, with the bad audio and everything, was Epiphany, right? It was Epiphany, the 12th day of Christmas. Weirdly, January 6th happens on a holiday. They tried to make it a holiday. Or a day of sensitivity. A lot of people trying to signal that it's like 9/11 yesterday, right? Not even close. But what happened yesterday with the speaker and the change is pretty big, I think, right? It's not to be ignored. But nowhere near as big as the story Cathie Wood shared this morning, right? Cathie Wood, famous Bitcoiner, famous GBTC paper Bitcoiner, I guess, but I would put her as a strong voice for Bitcoin. I've known her for a long time and have been talking Bitcoin with her for 5-6 years now. And she, if you remember, I discussed that model I created at CoinDesk called the Crypto Economics Explorer, or what I call market interest, a way to measure every other chain or coin versus Bitcoin as the denominator in a data set. And I explained this to her before it went public, and she was completely on board to be a part of a board that would have promoted this system, because she wanted to literally measure everything in Bitcoin. Forget about just crypto, right? I thought at the time, this was 2017, so in my mind, measuring the crypto market in Bitcoin was the right approach. It was basically like taking Bitcoin dominance and running it through everything else. And it put them all into context, right? You could see shitcoins easily because they would be socially hyped and wouldn't have a lot of use and all that. So, well, the good news is the camera is strong. So it might just be this audio, this mic, huh? Stupid mic. It might be. It might be. Well, we'll see. Let me know if it gets better now. So Kathy Wood shared this story yesterday, right? And amazing, right? So she says because everyone's confused by the bear market, Christmas, everyone missed the news. This actually came out in mid-December. And it turns out that a 12-year-old girl, Alyssa, suffering from leukemia, had gene therapy, and it cured her. What did they do exactly? Well, she had the type of leukemia that, everything good, just darn mic from yesterday. No worries, it's better now. Yeah, okay, good. So the way it worked was she had this T-cell lymphoma. And the T cells are actually the ones that are the cells that would go on attack and save you. They're the sort of army sentries in your blood, is what I understand. I'm not an expert. What she ended up having was T cells that had been altered to not be cancer. She had the bone marrow. She had everything for it. None of it worked. She was dying, right? Mother already told her it's over. And so they put in these new T cells that had been edited and that wouldn't catch this cancer, and that could work alongside her compromised T cells to wipe out what was in there. And it worked, right? It was a battle of T cells, and it worked. The gene-edited ones killed the cancer ones, and she's completely cured. And Chamath, that guy, he's been out touting it. He'll probably invest, I bet. So that's great news, right? So health, all right, cancer, actual therapies here and potentially available. But that's not the best news of the day. The best news of the day, because it could cure almost all of our problems, right, is something I noticed coming out of China, right? The long-suffering people of China, the terrible government they've got this time, the terrible government they had 200 years ago, the terrible government they had 400 years ago, right? This is the longest suffering people on earth that I can tell, right? They've been through a lot. And by longest suffering, I mean there are other groups that probably had a worse overall quality of life, let's say. But as far as having a government that just hates your guts and wants to kill you all the time, China's been through multiple generations now of just having the worst systems, the worst. And a lot of people talking about how the CCP might fall and what's going on there, and they got population troubles now, and they got economic troubles. Well, here's something that was shared by Doomberg and Crux Investor. So China plans to build 150 new nuclear reactors in the next 15 years. And he showed a map of where they are, just all over the place, right? And it's more, if they get it done, it's more than the world has built in the last 35 years. And Doomberg says what's even funnier is that the 440 billion to build all of these reactors is roughly the same amount of money that Germany spent this winter on natural gas trying to stay warm. So the brilliant German people, with all of their arrogance and all of their certainty they had figured everything out, as I've predicted on this show, you can basically count the entire generational wealth transfer in terms of them listening to Greta. Right? That's what happens. Right? The whole generational wealth transfer of Europe is going to be to pay electrical companies. Like they're going to pay for energy and heat, or they're going to suffer a massive migration. People are going to leave because they don't want to pay that kind of electrical cost. So, and doesn't this make it so obvious that had you had proper incentives and the psyops weren't involved and you weren't getting tricked by war messaging from Putin, who has been influencing European, basically promoting Greta. Putin has basically been promoting Greta for years now, right? He was promoting Greta before there was Greta. He paved the way to create Greta. because he was running misinformation throughout Europe in order to get them hooked on his energy source, right? He wanted that market. And so what you had in Europe was disinformation around nuclear energy, disinformation around the potential of wind energy and the potential of solar energy, disinformation about understanding grids, right? They preyed upon minds that didn't understand energy literacy or financial literacy, right? They preyed upon lack of knowledge of financial literacy and energy literacy. And those are our specialties in Bitcoin. That's what we understand better than the rest of the world, because that's what our entire worldview and measurement system is built from, right? The glasses you put on when you become a Bitcoiner are, one is energy literacy and one is financial literacy, and that's how you end up seeing the world. And those are the two most important things to be literate in to destroy the thing that happened before. Because, so the reason why I think this thing is important for China and the world is the following. The petrodollar, right, required and sort of created its own innovator's dilemma about alternative energy sources, because the whole shtick, the whole machine, the whole World War II machine that we've been talking about throughout this show was built on oil, right? It was built on that commodity. And you needed it for, I mean, of course, they put nuclear-powered submarines and nuclear-powered aircraft carriers for sure, because they needed the good energy in order to run the war machine. But everything else, the aircraft carrier's job was to police the lanes of oil shipments around the world and to make sure that all oil was bought in the single market of US dollars, right? There was no other market for oil except US dollars of substance and interest. I mean, I'm sure you could have bought oil in domestic markets here and there for other currencies, but you couldn't have got it. In a major global market, it was priced in dollars. And so here's the thing. Now that America and the unipolar world seem to be changing, America, if we get any investigations into the crime of the Biden family in Ukraine and Russia, now that we know more about persuasion, might change that whole scenario, right? So I continue to predict America coming home, Mike Flutter. I continue to predict America comes home and bases things out of this concept before. I wonder if it is the mic, huh? I wonder if it is the mic. I don't know. Maybe. So here's the thing. Without the petrodollar, that's already been abdicated, right? We now see the BRICS thing happening. We see oil priced in yuan. I can deal with the mic like this if I have to. It's better now. Okay. So we see oil in Shanghai now priced in yuan, the Chinese currency, and all of that changing. I still don't predict that they'll be able to get a currency together beyond the Chinese one, which is corrupted and useless as a global reserve currency, as far as I can tell. So in the end, it's not just the petrodollar that will be sacrificed. It's not just the dollar part that's going to be sacrificed. It's the petro part that's going to be sacrificed, because it won't be about oil and dollar markets, although those will, the oil market will always remain important. Combustion is such an important force to use. We probably don't need combustion for everything we use it for today, right? I think having a big combustion engine in a car is a problem. Oh yeah, CNBC just did a whole thing on the future of, of course, on the future of the e-bikes. Of course, they say, oh, there's more deaths in e-bikes now than bicycles, but they're comparing it to the wrong thing. You don't compare the deaths in e-bikes to bicycles. You compare the deaths in e-bikes to cars, because that's what they're trying to replace. If they get it right, they're going to replace cars. They're not going to replace bikes. People are going to want to bike as much as they do, right? You bike and go places for exercise and health and all that kind of stuff. But that's not the same as comparing the deaths of bicycles and e-bikes is just pointless. E-bikes want to displace cars. They want to displace all that. And the reason why we die when we drive cars is because we put this huge combustion engine in order to run the car, just to go down the street, right? And just to go do groceries. This huge combustion engine. Then because it weighs so much and it's so big, you got to put this whole big steel structure around you to carry the engine, to protect you from the other engines on the road. Now, if we're all just in these little go-kart type things that do go 30 miles an hour, no problem, right? That's fast enough, you can go to cities using combustion or other vehicles or higher end electric cars. That's all possible. But just one of these small little bicycles, tricycles, golf cart type things, you can start seeing them come with amazing style and really cool cottage industry type designs and bespoke manufacturing of them, because the parts required to build an electric trike, bike, quad are far fewer than the parts required to build a combustion engine car. The combustion engine car takes thousands of pieces. Electric version will take hundreds. And those hundreds of pieces are going to be simple and interchangeable and plug and play and all that kind of stuff. So you can imagine little towns having their own car companies and manufacturing capacity. Different styles for different areas based on weather could start to become a real thing, because we're not going to be using these global car supply chains anymore. They're way too complicated for what you get out of it, right? And then the cost, of course, of one of these things is going to be way less. So CNBC got some things right, of course. They led with the, more people die, whoa, and it was like 2 people or something. More people die. Yeah, okay. If they get their own roads in a city, and where they got it right, where it's the delivery stuff, the inability for New York City to scale public transit, right? They can't scale public transit in New York City. They got to shut it down. They couldn't even shut one line down that has still been compromised from Hurricane Sandy or Superstorm Sandy 10 years ago. It's the L train that goes under Brooklyn and under the Hudson River, under the East River and into Manhattan. And whatever. It's not the East River. It's the other side. The East River, sorry, it's the East River, yeah. So, it goes under there. They were supposed to close it down to repair it. They never could, haven't been able to. Too complicated. City can't handle the mitigating traffic stuff. So, major problem. And, when you look at New York's capacity, CNBC finally got that right, that this is probably the only solution. And if it happens in New York City, you can see it extend very quickly to the rest of the country. And I'm not, when I make my prediction on New York City going to e-bikes, I'm not talking about bike lanes. They get a third of the streets. They get a bridge. They get Williamsburg or Brooklyn Bridge. No cars anymore. No side of the street stuff. The cars are off. So it can happen, right? It could definitely happen. So put all that together, right? Supply chains changing, war changing, politics changing, education changing, legal responsibility of companies inherited from their privileged access to the war machine in World War II changing. We're on the cusp of a golden age here, right? Because I don't see any of these trends going away. I think politics are going to be all about getting to the bottom and figuring out and white pilling more and more people on what happens with government collusion with media. That's finally going to get socialized. Maybe we're going to help people like Luke Zaleski. Maybe we're going to help people like Aaron. I got to read. Aaron Rupar did one too. Oh man, Aaron Rupar. I don't know if I saved it. Was it ever funny? Yeah, Aaron Rupar, the greatest hoax purveyor of all time, right? So anyway, the point is, we're going to learn more about wiretapping and all that. Mike again? Okay. Anyway, we're done. We're basically at the end. I have no more content other than the conclusion, which is we're at the cusp of a golden age. All the old systems are breaking, and nature abhors a vacuum, guys. Nature abhors a vacuum, and that's Bitcoin's major advantage here. All right, team, I'm going to figure this mic thing out. I'll get a better mic for tomorrow. It might be the mic. It might just be the mic. It might be the mic. Let me see what happens when I take off the... Terrible. I should have run it for a bit today to see if this thing started to break apart. This is the actual mic on the machine. All right, we'll figure it out. Peace, guys.